Are we live? Oh, we live.
We're now live.
Wow. So, well, Runeslinger Anthony, thank you for accepting the invitation. Super impromptu invitation as well, as usual.
As usual, yes.
As usual. So
We have time when we have time.
oh, yeah, and we live, across the globe. So it's 2:26 here.
3:26 p.m. here.
Yeah, so AM here, PM on your side. So we've been recently, I've been up late recently. My schedule is more night schedule recently. So I see him online sometimes really late, and I realize, oh shit, I'm sleeping usually when he's there. That's why I don't talk so much. so we've been like trying to have this live conversation for quite a while, and we did some few little, 5 minutes and 10 minutes here and there. And so welcome again. It's been maybe 2 years since we had this kind of
What was the last one? The story, the rupture of structure.
Yeah, the rupture in culture. The rupture in culture, I think. Like that. Yeah. All right. So here's the topic for today. So you posted a great video, about the importance of the how we play. Opposed to maybe what we play, and it's really relevant for this playlist that I'm doing nowadays, which is called Ways to Play, and which this video is going to be part of, because this is what I'm trying to tackle, this idea of. So here's this conversation is going to assume that we play raw. So everything that we're going to be discussing from now on is assuming that we play by the rules. We don't change the rules. We don't house rule. We don't fiat. We don't delete rules or avoid rules. So we play. We assume that we're going to play raw, and so we're going to try to explore this territory where, assuming that you take any game out there, and how much difference it make the way you play. Like how far can we go by having two different experiences, like so different, by playing raw, still playing raw, but approaching the game with different kind of principles or different kind of style or different kind of perspective. And so this is what we wanna discuss together tonight.
Right on.
Yeah, so why don't you why don't we start by you kind of coming back on your Wraith review you did recently and finished recently, because in this game particularly seems to allow for such a possibility. There's so many different ways to play Wraith that it's going to change the whole thing, even if you play it by the rules, right?
No, it's true. And when we think about it, there's different ways to play Wraith just in terms of addressing its setting. Right? So you could play relatively recently formed Wraiths in the Shadowlands, adjacent to the lands of the living, and never ever get into the underworld of Wraith. You could play a very long campaign that way. You could do the opposite. You could play in the underworld and never deal with the life issues of these characters. You could play it like a traditional fantasy game of exploration and collection of treasures and, combating of monsters. And this is just on the setting level. This isn't addressing how you play at all, but this is, what is this game about? Well,
yeah.
It can be so many different things.
Definitely.
Just in terms of setting.
Yeah.
And then Wraith is a game where the ownership of character is not contested. Like, your character is your character and your shadow is your shadow. But ownership of that character is divided. Right? You play your character, I play your shadow, or you play your character and the storyteller plays your shadow, or you play your character and the storyteller and the shadow guide play your shadow. until such time as the shadow's in control, and then you play the shadow, and either I or the storyteller and I play the psyche. Right?
Yeah.
So there's 3 more decisions on top of the setting.
Yeah. And just to make sure, I mean, I don't think that the book is clear on how to do that. I don't think they express themselves. I don't know. I haven't read the book, but usually this is the level of consideration that is not addressed in most core books.
In the 20th edition, it's addressed more than it had been previously. I think because one of the design goals must have been to get more people to feel comfortable trying it. You know, you hear so many people say, oh, I've read it, but I don't think I could ever play it, or I couldn't get anybody interested in it. And so I think attention was paid to helping you get it to the table in the first place. So pre-considering problems like the, how are we going to do this? But yeah, the idea of sharing your character, that someone else at the table is going to be representing the dark voice in your ear, right? And you're not really sure if that's going to be a self-destructive voice or an assistive voice or just commentary, or, you know, that makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Definitely. Yeah. I experienced it. Yeah, I know. And so, and this is interesting because you start right away with setting. You know, when I actually think that setting is fluff. So, for like in terms of way to play, you know, basically usually I see setting as like, you know, the last consideration in terms of experience. But I mean, I completely understand what you mean, because it changed everything depending on the way you approach it. You know, the conception you have of the not the Umbra, but
the underworld.
Yeah, there's a maze. You know, in
the labyrinth. Yeah,
the labyrinth thing. You know, how you utilize the structure or not, and everything. Like, I mean, someone who reads it a certain way, someone who reads the setting another way, and interpret the aesthetic differently. But for me, that is aesthetic stuff, like fluff stuff. But in terms of actual experience, like how you go around resolution, how you go around, you know, the death of a character, you know, like, you know, stuff like all these kinds of stuff, like okay, so can you die, you know,
in a race?
No, but yeah, but can you die if you fail if you fail a task resolution role? You know, this is something that books never cover, right? So
or rarely, yeah.
If you go by the rules, it's implying that if you fail a task resolution role that is deadly, well, you die. But there's so this is an interesting place for me to start now in terms of changing the whole experience, because
okay,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. The reason why I start with setting, I guess, is that that's what hits players first, and so I guess I focus myself on, right? You say, let's play this, and you're holding up, I don't know.
But you're totally right, though. You're totally right. I see it. Me, usually my knee-jerk reaction is I start by the basic rule, the most ground level rule, and you go and you start. It's kind of like you started with the. It's like Aristotle versus Plato. You started with the fluff. You started with the setting. Let's talk about setting first, and then we talk about the dice. And I say, no, let's talk about the dice, and then we will do the setting after. That's an important.
Right. But it's so this right there is a hint that people might play games differently.
Oh, of course, definitely. Yeah.
There you go. I mean, but I mean, let's talk about it for a second. Let's say character death. Can a character die? So Fantasy Flight Games produced the Star Wars role-playing game, and to do that, they harnessed the spirit, let's say, a different one.
I know, but they produced this one as well.
Yeah.
I chose this one over the other one, but that's another story. All right, keep going.
It is another story.
Yeah, keep going. Go ahead. So tell me.
All right, so, you know, they harnessed this narrative dice system that they had used in Warhammer Fantasy to mixed reviews. They they refine it, they boil it down, and they tune it for Star Wars. Okay, so Star Wars, that version of the game that you just lifted up, the D6 version, the original, first edition version of Star Wars, which then had to go through several revisions to kind of get to work just right.
Mm-hmm.
But in both of these games, or maybe because of that game that you have, there's no overt discussion of death in the Star Wars role-playing game. All right. There are specific situations where they say, if your starfighter, if your X-Wing gets blown up in space, it's unlikely your character will survive. It says stuff like that, rather than saying you're dead. But in the specific wound section, it talks about, you have wound levels and you have emotional stress and strain and fatigue levels, right? And when these things reach 0, then the character falls unconscious, right? Or is unable to act meaningfully. Well, what if they keep taking damage? This is a normal question. Like, what if they go over that threshold? Well, how much more over that threshold can they get? And they tell you that you can take, in negative damage, double your threshold. But nowhere does it explain what it means if you go over that. So it won't come out and say your character dies. Why not? I think it's a really good question, right? So we could posit a Darth Vader scenario, right? He gets knocked into the lava. He's all bleeding. Any normal person would die, right? And so if the character's not important to the story, we can just move away from that character. They're toast, literally toast on some beach somewhere. But if the character is important, or if the people are struggling, the game master has that loophole to wriggle through saying, well, you're not dead yet, or you're not quite dead. You're like the man in black and the princess, the Princess Bride, not quite dead is still partly alive. So you have that opportunity. There are some hard sections in the game, like death in space, right? But the rules themselves shy away from talking explicitly about character death. Whereas a game like The Moral Project, a D100 base game, it's percentile, it's finely focused on I'm going to use the word simulate because that's what they're really going for, the lethality of modern warfare, right? What does it mean to a human body to get shot? What does it mean to a human body to get shot and not have proper medical treatment? I mean, all of these things matter in the game, and there's a lot of detail paid to how characters die. And this has a profound effect, right? If you're playing Star Wars, you're going for larger than life, you're going for great risks, you're going for being heroes. And if you're playing Moral Project, you are struggling to stay alive. You know exactly how your character will die, or can die, or can be hurt, or can be incapacitated. And so you spend your energy not doing those things.
Yeah, definitely. But in these examples you mentioned, the rules are kind of expressed in such a way that it will produce this consequences on the experience, where in a game like Moral Project this, and in games Star Wars like that. But like when it's by the rules, when the rules cover that, how much of the style and the hows can we go about, right? I mean,
yeah.
But that's the whole idea. With the rules, it becomes really tricky. In the setting and in the fluff part of a game, it becomes part of the social contract. Like discussing the aesthetic and how we want to go about that, like we did in the Veil, for example.
Right.
And then we agree that we're not going to bring a chainsaw arm, because this is not the kind of right? So
urban legend of the chainsaw.
Actually, I think I put a chainsaw in a garbage dump somewhere, like in one of those.
You did, yeah.
I mean, I had to, but anyway. So yeah, but when it comes to rules, assuming we play rough, there is some really interesting situations sometimes, like you mentioned, like in the Moral Project, for example. We don't even. It's really hard to go around I mean, it's written black on white kind of thing. But in a game where it doesn't say anything like Star Wars, then these loopholes you call, this is entry point for GM fiat.
Or I want to. I did say loopholes, and now I'm regretting it. But
okay.
A game like Star Wars is trying to bridge a gap between, let's say, older understandings of play and newer understandings of play, so that, you know, everybody can find their footing in that game. Not everybody, but, you know, a significant portion of the different types of gamers can find their footing in that game and make something valuable and fun out of it. So one of its, not rules, well, partly a rule, but one of its, let's say, procedures, if rules can be differentiated from procedures, one of its procedures is to recognize that the Star Wars galaxy is huge and there'll be no book that can cover everything. And so here's the basic philosophy, learn the philosophy, and now go forward, young adventurers, and make it happen. So as a procedure, because there's fiat in terms of the game master deciding what an outcome is, and there's fiat in terms of a game master deciding how something will be handled. And fiat can be one person's or the group's, and it can't always be bad. I mean, we talked about this before. Bad fiat is bad and good fiat is good. But in terms of willfully changing things that people have agreed to, that's an example of the bad fiat.
Oh, no, that's not even, it's not even in consideration. If we agree.
Right, but because we're playing raw. And
also, if we agree on a certain procedure, you know, in social contract, we keep to the procedure. I mean, that's kind of course. Right. But so yeah, so for me, the question remains of, you know, I was talking about the idea of going back to the old school. You know, like recently in one of my videos where you know, I just got this as an example, or Boot Hill, you know, for example, like where you get an old game.
Yeah, Boot Hill is pretty old.
Yeah, this is really old. And so in these games, they're perfect because these games are actually full of holes. I mean, it's written in a way like they have like really straightforward rules, really open, you know.
Most of the questions you have should be answered.
Most of the question, the GM should shoot through the shit. Can I shoot it or just wing it? You know?
No, I mean, like if you wanted, in Boot Hill, for example, if you wanted to know what happens when a character gets shot, you're going to have gunfights. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah. Most of these old school games cover all these things and put it in either in tables, you know, easy to use tables or stuff like that. Right. And so these games are amazing to actually put that in perspective, because you have room to change the way you play them, right?
Right. And so, for example, in Boot Hill, who narrates?
What?
Who narrates in Boot Hill?
What do you mean?
Well, like, where does description rest? I mean, when I played Boot Hill when it was new, that was the game master, because that's what we all assumed.
Yeah, and the way it's written, the game master narrates pretty much everything. I mean, they don't even talk about that. It's the 70s. They don't even talk about that in the book. Yeah. So I did tonight. I just posted right before this, another principle in my list of ways to play. So just before this one, it's called GM narrates failures, player narrates successes. And this, I mean, this principle of play, this procedure, you know, this principle, I mean, it covers so much ground. Sharing the narration, like the dice tells who, say, when, and what.
So this is an actual rule in Star Wars.
In the new one.
And in the new one, and it was a common practice in my groups growing up. Yeah. There was a little bit of but going on when we were younger, which eventually went away, and it reappears every time you start a new group, kind of thing. Like, I do this. Well, you know, actually. Well, actually, in this game, in this genre, whatever, it works a bit different than the last game. There's that corrective period. So it's been out there, but how many games has it been as a rule? I'm going to be right back. You keep going.
Yeah, no problem. So, when he's asking how many games it has been as a rule. So in the video I did, right before this one, I discussed this. It's like some games, they actually produce specific rules about that. So I don't remember which one. I think Apocalypse, Powered by the Apocalypse games actually have that, because it's like, okay, so on the 7 and the 9, this and that happened, and so they structure narration, but they do it on an abstract level. So it's not really on a success. GM start narration, player finishes it. Or on a failure, player start narration, GM finishes it. Sometimes some games do that way. I find it a little clunky for no reason, just like failure, success. I mean, it's kind of like easier, more broad. So but the thing though, and I covered that. I don't cover it in my video, but what about these knowledge skills? So I have historical knowledge of this and that, and my intention is to create this story event that happened that year, and bring that lore to the game. So if I succeed, I narrate that lore, it becomes canon to the story, and the GM needs to deal with it afterwards. So some people are not down with that approach at all, right? So this is but the thing is that I can take Bootil, I can take this game and utilize that, and it works perfectly. It's just a completely different approach to understanding how the skills work in these old school games. And this is some, 2000, the Forge kind of era idea. Yeah. And this is the kind of stuff that's interesting now, because we still have these old games. This one is the 30th anniversary thing, so it's the new one, So they are still around, and they are some are people, like when you go on drive-through, you get, I got Bootil, they print it to me. So they're easily accessible, and they're there. And some of these games have great ideas in them, gems of the past, like old ways that have been forgotten of doing specific things. So, but when you play raw, they have problems. I mean, because they leave so much room for bullshit and avoiding rules, and they have always big sections where they say, it's your game, do what you want with the rules, change the rules and all that, like all these bullshit sections, they're there. I mean, I find that I say bullshit because I'm a raw advocate. I'm gonna take position, but for the sake of this conversation, it's like this is great. We should. I mean, it's a great opportunity to make an experiment, right? Like you take an old game that is really basic, really straightforward, like Bootil or this or Cyberpunk 2020, and you say I play raw. And then we have these two different approaches, like two different way of doing this game, but we stick to the same game. And I'm pretty sure, we can reach a really distinctive experience on both sides of a spectrum, kind of thing,
I think so.
And even with, I mean. There's so many. I mean, it's so. I have so many things I'd like to discuss about that, but I just don't know where to start. So.
Okay, well let's
you keep going with Wraith, right?
Let's back up a little bit. We can use Wraith as an example. We can say something like, okay, so you're playing the Psyche, right? Mm-hmm. You have done the bulk of character creation. You've established who this character is. You've shared it with the group, because character creation is done with the group. With the storyteller over top in a supervisory role for the purpose of establishing links, right? So it's a group effort to create characters. It's an individual effort to create personality. And then once that's done, the shadows need to be created, right? And so this is a part of your character that you have to be willing to let go of. Right from the get-go. Yeah. And let's say in a classic setup, you create the Psyche, the group is there. Everybody knows what everybody's primary personality is supposed to be, and then they'll see how it's going to develop and play actually. And the storyteller's there to make sure that the group is going to be able to work together, because Wraith is hard work. You know.
Yeah.
So then
study
separately, people go off and create other people's shadows. The storyteller and the shadow guide, they create the shadows. So let's say in play, your shadow starts talking to you. So this is someone sitting across from you at the table, and you get the signal that they're speaking in the voice of the shadow, whatever that might be. It might be something simple like this, right? This is the voice of the shadow speaking. Mm-hmm. And they start talking about your childhood. Right. So this is something that Wraith has always had as a part of it. The shadow has an archetype, just like the psyche has an archetype. So maybe you've got the parent as the shadow. So it's trying to coddle you and control you and make sure that you do what it wants. And so it starts talking about mistakes that you made in your childhood. Now these are things that you, the player, have never thought of for the psyche. Mm-hmm. They talk about like your 8th birthday or something, and this is coming out of nowhere. So suddenly, you're away from the dice, you're in total fantasy land, and another player is guiding the narrative experience. And this is a moment in time that doesn't actually exist. Right? This is happening in your own head. Mm-hmm. So it's an elastic period of time. If you get into a conversation with your shadow, eventually people will notice, and you might be speaking out loud to your shadow, so they're only hearing half the conversation, right? There's a whole lot of stuff going on there, and this is some player taking the lead, right? This is a perfect opportunity for that character to be bothered by this shadow, so I'm going for it. They don't ask permission to do it, right? They just do it. Yeah. This was a very radical concept when Wraith was new, less so now. But I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. We could have it be in some groups that the storyteller or a one dedicated shadow guide, I forgot to mention that earlier, takes all the shadows.
Yeah, takes all the shadows.
And now it becomes more like performance.
Yeah.
But
I did. But when I played Mage 20 for the first time with my group online, I have the sessions on my page, on the playlist. In the playlist, I apply that ref principle to the avatar. So good. I was the GM. I got that workload off my shoulder, and I said, between you guys, you will do each other's avatar. So they knew in advance which avatar they were.
Right.
And I applied this exact same principle to Mage, and it works perfectly. It's great. It's amazing. And every time you want to do a game where you have like either multiple personality disorder, or evil possessing your body, like a demon in your head that's taking over. Whatever, can do that. It's right. And Ref actually created it, so it changed the way that you play the game.
So like the troop style play where multiple people around the table are playing multiple characters. Having this out there, I've liked to do that for most of my time playing. I like the other people that are there to have a voice that is not mine. Right? Like I know a lot of game masters like to do a variety of voices, or they do a lot of acting, and I'll do that too and get some enjoyment out of it. But what if we're playing, in Hollow Earth Expedition or something like that, and you've got 10 retainers, right? They're carrying stuff in a trail behind you. The game master can, of course, portray that in a variety of different ways, but it's really kind of interesting when you say, look, why don't you take the water bearer, and why don't you take the native archer, and why don't you take the pirate who's also trapped here, and and just give them voice from time to time.
And so every session you switch character, but they're still there. They become an NPC for the GM when they're not PCs, and everybody
that kind of stuff.
So one guy can let's say the pirate can have been chosen like by 3 different persons, or everybody around the table did the pirate at least once, and they have a different way of portraying him.
You can do it that way too. I tend to have it, establish them with people, and this can make people uncomfortable just by itself. But it gets an interesting.
That's interesting. Troop style. I never thought about it. You can do that with every game.
You can do that with every game. Yes.
Yeah, pretty most game. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Although one game, Headspace, goes even farther with it.
Oh yeah.
Because it's a kind of a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and it's kind of a Shadowrun style, cyberpunk, going on missions, operators kind of deal, except that all the characters are in each other's heads. Right, they're linked.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, that's another level. Yeah.
So that's another going beyond it even further, but
that's setting though. That's part of the setting. Yeah.
But I mean, it's also part of the procedure, right?
Of course.
It deals with metagaming. There isn't any, right? What you say is what people hear and experience, right? So that's kind of interesting. But where I was going with this was that, let's say the setup for the particular game, like the game itself or this particular session, is a mystery, right? So what are the procedures for handling the introduction of information? You mentioned earlier, being able to just drop something into canon, and that works flawlessly unless there's something that people want to discover.
Look, the mystery, we had a discussion about that in the past, but the idea of a whodunit, right? A whodunit style or genre, Sherlock Holmes movie,
right,
detective story and all that,
or even a Monster of the Week kind of thing.
Yeah, so this is a particular animal, and actually, I said a couple of times, but I don't talk much about it. But a couple of years ago, I worked on designing my own game, and it's that I wanted this. That was the point where everything didn't work. You know what I'm saying? Like, this kind of game is a typical game. Like, it's a kind of an animal that either you assume you play a scenario, which is okay, which is quite okay in itself. Either you assume that, or you're being railroaded and fiat by design, by the nature of the story.
You lost me there. So you're playing through something that's prepared, or you're playing through something that's prepared, is what I heard.
Yeah. So, if you play a scenario and you assume a scenario, like the mask of
Nyarlathotep. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there you go. So that's so you assume that. So the GM is not prepping anything; he's following a script.
Well, yeah, sure, but they have to prepare that script a lot. But yeah,
he's not plotting; he's prepping, but he's not plotting.
Sure.
So making that distinction, but if you don't do that, you are playing just your friend's story. So you have a GM, which is your friend or someone you know, and this guy is writing everything, and you're gonna follow his script. So this kind of game doesn't really allow.
There's one more.
But wait, because the point for me is that if you follow a scenario written in a book, the answers are already all designed, tightly gripped for everything you do. You go there, you do this, the player do this. If you fail, there's that, and if you succeed, there's that. But if the point is that I'm trying to make is that if a player rolls a skill and he fails, and it doesn't matter, if he doesn't get the clue or the info he need to keep going, assuming you use failing forward as a procedure,
right?
Failure is irrelevant in these games because you don't want to get stuck. You don't want the people to walk around not reaching the end of the end of the investigation. So if let's say you fail like 75%, let's say you fail 75% of the time, and you apply failing forward because you want to make the investigation reach a conclusion. Well, that's gonna mean, and I mean, if maybe I just don't know how to do it, but that's gonna mean that some of these roles are gonna be irrelevant, just because you're gonna get the answer anyway, right?
So to summarize, if You're using a scenario that was prepared by someone who's not in your group. So you bought it or whatever.
Yeah, but
Right. So the game master in this scenario is not plotting.
yeah.
All they're doing is not all, but what they are doing is preparing.
Following a script.
Sure. And the players are playing the role of characters who are trying to solve the mystery. Let's be very clear that it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what the mystery is, but so they need to collect information until they reach a point where they have enough information that they can act toward achieving a solution.
Now, let's say they fail all their roles.
Okay.
Or 75% of them roles.
But that was a double thing. That was let's say they fail a lot and you apply the failing forward procedure or principle. Yes, roles then become largely irrelevant because failing forward won't, in this case, involve can involve improvising something else. And this is the point that I wanted to get to, which was we can make the assumption, we can assume that the way to play a mystery is to want to get to the end. But I can tell you this, I have run Massive Nyarlathotep many times, and it has never crossed my mind that anybody would finish it. But the challenge of maybe we can be the ones to finish it has been a part of the player's fun. And a part of my fun is seeing how far they can get.
Yeah.
And
that's the fun of going through scenarios like classic, hardcore, difficult scenario, because it's actually a challenge. You don't know if you're going to finish it. And if you do, it's kind of like, yeah, I did it.
Now, one of the things that makes that particular scenario a challenge is that there are, Call of Cthulhu in general and basic role-playing, they don't have levels, right? So it's the idea of encounter balance or, threat ratings or challenge ratings or anything it doesn't exist. So, and the scenario is quite open-ended in that there is a timeline of events, but it's huge, right? What was written is huge. So there's a lot of freedom inside the framework for players to do things in different orders. And there's a lot of encouragement and information provided for the game master to extrapolate and expand. So there's what are they trying to do is told to you, and how are they going to do it is told to you, and where are they going to be doing it is told to you, and what are some big pieces of evidence that have been left, and then they ask you to fill in the blanks as the game master. But it's so long, right? The trail of this investigation is so long that the way the game mechanics work, it wears the sanity down of the investigators. Even if they avoid the violent outcomes, it's so highly unlikely that they'll make it through to the end without somebody somewhere cheating. It makes it a real challenge. So it's an ideal setting for troop style play. And this is something that the new version of Master Nyarlathotep has brought forward, is that, when you make your character, make sure that there are other characters who are going to want to carry on this torch because of the reasons that I just expressed.
Yeah.
Right. But the new rules make it so much more likely that you will complete the scenario because thinking has changed. Scenarios aren't challenges anymore. They are entertainment experiences.
Yeah.
Right. People expect to get to the end. And like when you said it just now, because you want to solve the mystery, it was like, I had one of those like disconnect moments, like, what? No, you want to see if you can.
I was generalizing a lot, of course, but
yeah.
I was, just trying to make a thought experiment where,
right,
like exactly. The whodunit, like the mystery genre, like there is a problem because there is, in advance, there's supposed to be something in advance is supposed to like the conclusion is already known when the experience of play is beginning, like who did it, how and why. In a mystery game,
right,
it's supposed to be already known when we start. What about a mystery game, an experience of RPG mystery game where when we start, nobody knows even the GM doesn't know. And the dice, the way they fall, actually reveals stuff.
Yeah, you can certainly do that.
Of course. And this is what I was trying to work on, because I was finding that ways to play a style in the mystery game like Call of Cthulhu or Gumshoe or these games, you cannot. There's going to be irrelevant rolls. Otherwise, like, failure is going to be so dramatic that the information is not going to come out. You know what's really annoying? It's like, for example, you're in an investigation as a player. You roll some dices. You're trying to see things. You're trying to unsolve some clues and everything, and you fail. And the GM, even though he's utilizing failing forward or not,
or proper role framing.
Or proper role framing or not, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like, you fail. So as a character, as a player, you know that there was an information there and you won't have it. And then eventually you get an information out of nowhere in the fluff of whatever. And you're like, oh man, you just gave me what I failed to achieve there. You just gave it to me like a little later. And now my experience is ruined because I feel like my roles were not relevant, and I feel like my failure was not,
Yeah. That's a true experience.
Yeah.
Although sometimes it's the when you get the information that matters, not the if you get the information. Be able to figure things out after. It's like, oh yeah, well, I wish I had known that earlier. But have you seen this game?
I saw you. I think, did you do unpacking?
I did. This is
but I don't know about it. What is it about?
This is Ironsworn. I don't. It doesn't exactly fit into this conversation, but one of the things is that the rules in here are expressly divided up into 3 different ways to play, right?
Oh, so you can play Outbreak Undead?
Kind of, yeah. You can play it with the classic Game Master. You can play it co-op, or you can play it solo.
Wow. And, you gotta be kidding.
Nope. Says right there.
Oh my God, dude, this is like so much relevant to the conversation. So this game is actually designed. Is there a 3 design or 1 design?
That's a good question. Is it 3 designs or 1? Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, you haven't read it?
I've not finished it.
So you don't. But do you know? Is it 1 or 3 different designs?
Oh, it's 3.
Okay. So you have like 3 sets of rules that do 3 different ways that produce 3 different experiences. Imagine 1 set of rules in a game written, 1 set of rules, but the designer and the writer explain and express and present the rules in 3 different ways, allowing you to get 3 different kind of experience with the same set of rules. That's the whole point I'm trying to convey.
That this does that through the use of oracles and things like that. But I think anytime you have a GM or anytime you have a cooperative group making decisions, that the play experience shifts away from what it would be like as a solo game or as a video game. So I think of it as 3 different sets of rules, but it's laid out for you as 1 set of rules with different conditions.
Oh man, I need to read it. That's so much.
That's available. It's available free, so you can.
So relevant for what I'm trying to say. Because that's really interesting, because this is the new shift I'm going through. Now, because I see and I saw Ivan as well, like when I was watching his channel where you introduced him to certain games, like Tech Noir, or just like me, like games that he was interested in, and he started to read, and then he sees different ways to play. He's like, oh my God, there is things that I was talking with him recently, and he said I sat down at the table in person in his town playing with a group, and these guys, so they were not exposed to different ways to play. So they were playing in a, like, let's say like the common table from the mid-90s,
sure.
D&D from a common table from the mid-90s, So you know, GM hiding the roles behind a binder, you know, like you know, just killing monster, you know, not telling you, not keeping track of numbers, and just saying, oh, this one's dead now, and stuff like that, right? And all this kind of stuff that seems for some of us now like so old. So like this is like this way to play is just so not satisfying anymore because we've seen all these others. But I mean, at the same time, I kind of believe that it's possible to develop a level of organizing play that is distinct from ruling, and that is also distinct from either like metagaming or a social contract. So it's like a level where it's like this is why I use the word principle.
Right.
Style, I think style is a little too abstract, but because it's kind of like a level of understanding gaming where no matter the game you buy, even like for example, I was reading The Veil, you know, I've mentioned in one of my videos, like this guy, he has good ideas, but his writing is not, you know, it's not the kind of writing I like. So
it's soft in places where it needs to be hard.
Yeah, stuff like that. So sometimes there is a gap between your understanding of the game and the experience you want, and the way the book is written. So still assuming we play raw, but like you need to bridge that gap sometimes without creating new rules. Because I'm trying to express a way, like when I'm saying principle, and I'm trying to discuss like these idea of we're not adding rules, we're not hacking the thing, adding rules and shit. We just utilize them as written, but in different ways. And so it's a tricky thing, you know, because house rule can seem to be that, right? But it's not, because
let's do another little thought experiment. Let's say you're playing Boot Hill.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's say for whatever reason it was like bandits, like banditos rushing in on a stagecoach, right? And so we have our action, whatever. The horses get killed, all the bandits get killed, all the good guys get killed except for one. And the setting for this was out in the desert. So the player wants to keep going. You want to keep going. You want to get to town and it'll be fun, and we'll add in new PCs there. Because Boot Hill, you're constantly creating new PCs because everybody's getting shot and killed. So now you're out in the desert. And you realize, I can't remember if Boot Hill has rules for this or not, but let's just imagine that Boot Hill does not have rules for dehydration in the desert and starvation and all that exposure stuff.
Yeah.
But you want to play through this.
Yeah.
So
how do you go about that?
How do you go? The game doesn't have a rule for it. The game doesn't have a procedure for it, except for that little box test which says, remember, this is your game and you can make it whatever it is that you want. And so you as the game master have to either decide.
On the group, right? On the play.
So A, the game master decides.
Yeah.
B, the game master throws it open to the table saying, fellow Boot Hill players, how should we handle this?
Yeah.
Or should we handle it at all? Should we just kind of fade to the next scene narratively, right? Because this wasn't a big thing either when that game was new. The idea of shifting time. There were lots of people who played, right? You had to go into the dungeon and you have to get back out of the dungeon and back to town before you can stop playing, kind of stuff. Every moment had to be accounted for, and which is a different mindset. So do we fast forward and have our hero stumble into town if he can make a D20 save or whatever, kind of thing? It's not in the rules.
Yeah.
You want to play it. A decision has to be made somehow. Yeah. So that's adding to the rules in a sense. Also, here's the rest of the thought experiment. The game is totally silent on who does narration, right? Mm-hmm. Game master on failure, player on success, game master on success and failure. It literally says nothing about it.
Like
It's not even considered.
Most game today still don't even
don't talk about who will describe things.
Which is aberrant, but that's another. I mean, keep going.
So by making the decision as the group ourselves that the game master is going to narrate failures, but everybody else is going to narrate everything else. How is that different from adding in rules for dehydration?
I don't understand that. Oh, can you repeat that second?
So I gave two examples of things which are not in the book.
Yeah.
Adding one is adding in a rule because it's talking about how to apply damage from exposure. Example 2 is adding in a way to process information. It's being added to the game, right? It doesn't exist in the text of the game, so it's being added. So in both cases, we as a group are adding things in. We're exercising our fiat as players about how we will play this game.
I understand. So, I understand what you're saying.
So at this point, are we still playing raw?
That's a good question. I keep on asking me this question. This is of course, because the thing is like, yeah, I know this is the zone we are dealing with, because the game don't provide you with that, so you kind of have to deal with it.
Yeah,
but you. I know.
So we didn't change any rules.
We didn't change. We didn't avoid. We didn't delete.
We may have been inspired by the other injury rules to create
We stay coherent with what is already proposed, but we have to make a resolution procedure for that situation, right?
Yeah.
So, man.
Now, to be fair to Boot Hill, I don't remember what it says about the role of the game master and the role of the player. I mean, it's intended to be a fast and short kind of experience.
Really old school. I mean, it's really basic, traditional, But they have so much cool ideas, like creating your horse, skills for horses and shit. So it's really interesting.
That makes me want to pull it up here right now. I got it on PDF. My original copies.
I kind of gave up on. Aces and Eight. I mean, it's so expensive. It's hard to find. So I said I want myself a cowboy and Indian, action movie kind of thing. So this one is perfect. But yes, but you are really good. You show exactly the kind of situation where this happening. So do we add, or do we actually just trying to fill the blanks where the game has some?
Well, see, I would say that the so-called golden rule, telling you that you can change things that aren't working, I think that applies to this case, and I think it's there because somebody says you've got 30 pages. We're willing to produce a game, and we're going to give you 30 pages or 120 pages or whatever, right? 128, and you've got to fit your game into it, and you've got this idea for a pretty useful, pretty flexible core mechanic, whatever it is. But you don't have enough pages, you don't have enough time, you don't have enough play testers to conceive of every possible situation. So you hit the classics from the movies or the books or whatever, right? And you go and you say to the game master, stuff might come up, and your job as the game master is to rule. It's rulings over or in the absence of rules. Roar, right? Which too many people out there are putting in conflict with raw. Right?
No, it's a continuation.
It's not.
Continuation.
Yeah. You play raw, and then when you can't, then you have to rule.
Yeah, and you the only thing you need to do if you want to make sure everything's going to be all right is being coherent with the rest of the experience and the system and the design and the intention and everything, and being consistent.
Consistent, yeah.
Consistent, yeah. So if you have these two, I mean, it's never going to feel different than what you've been playing. You know, you just, it's a continuation.
Right.
But yeah, so but that, I mean, so that's on the really low level. But you're right. There is some situation where the ways to play is going to be really, really important. And you also produce this question where, is it one person who's going to decide? Is it the group who's going to decide, right? Or are we not going to decide? And this changed everything. And I think Iron Sorn, 3 ways to play. I think this idea, I mean, that's where they produce these this kind of holy trinity of their own, where it's true. I mean, some people do solos. I always wanted to. Never find a game that
Tunnels and Trolls, the second role-playing game, has a lot of support for solo play.
They have a solo thing in there. Do you remember that? They have a solo.
Barely.
They have a solo mission in there. Like, it's really weird. I was reading it. It was
to teach you the rules. Yeah, it was pretty common.
The rules. It's an amazing idea to teach you the rules. It's an amazing idea, but they also show you how to actually, design yourself one. So you're right. So co-op, GM power, or solo.
The Tower of GM power.
I don't know how to say it. I mean, co-op. But the thing is that it's really interesting because now we can actually show that co-op is different than power to one GM.
Than guided. They call it guided in Iron Sorn. But
yeah. So that's
guided co-op or solo.
But because I remember that for such a long time, trying to make that distinction conceptually in our video on YouTube was complicated.
Right.
Because it's like cooperative. Some people, think this is a cooperative hobby by nature, but
sure, we have to accept that there's a percentage, right? There's different allotments of control. So it's cooperative or collaborative in its nature of you make the situation that my character is in, and I decide what my character does, and the dice helps us decide how well that goes. So it's collaborative.
Or who has the power in which instance, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's this series of my ways to play. It has becoming really interesting because I'm trying to surf on a new level of reading and approaching these games, because I want to stick to raw, but some games out there, like especially the old ones, were quite cool. Sometimes some of them are really nice, but they are not written to help me if I want to play raw. They're not written in a way that I can actually have a cool experience with. So I have to add this layer where I'm not hacking, I'm not house ruling. But I'm going to ask you this question as a veteran. Do you think I'm doing semantics here?
Oh, but
because house rule can be interpreted as what I call principle here in this series, right? Like, Samuel G, what you're doing right now is basically you're just house ruling these games, making you so is it semantics, or am I actually really doing something different here?
Maybe I'm being semantic and thinking that a house rule actually has to be a rule, like how you're going to handle hit points, or if like in D6 Star Wars, all deaths happen off screen, kind of stuff. But the principle of play, I mean, like,
it doesn't change the rule as written. That's what I think is different, because a house rule usually is like, this one is out, here's mine, or this one we do that way because it doesn't work well, as written. So it's changing actual rules.
You're changing how the rules are being implemented, in a sense, right? You've got a principle for how you want to play, which leads you to a procedures of play. Yeah. And procedures are how to use the rules.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to find that is underlying why so many tables playing the same game are different. Whether or not a group ever played played D&D with henchmen and hirelings, and if they did, if those people had personalities or if they were just background, and things like that, or who actually got to describe your successful attack or your successful search of the room. Was it always the game master, or was it usually you, or right? And how did that particular dance develop over time? So we like what we like. We maybe recognize what we like. And then if we want to be serious about it, we learn to systematize a way to get to what we like.
There you go. That's exactly it. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, no, not being semantic, but I want to go back in time. We did you and I and some others did a video series that was kind of loosely called Zones of Control.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Completely forget about that.
Yeah. So I think all of your videos in that series are gone because you erased your channel. But mine are still up where I talk about what you said. But I've got a video where I tell a story about running Palladium Fantasy.
Zone of Control.
Yeah.
It's old. Okay. Ah.
So in the Zones of Control, Go ahead. I told a story about adding a new player, right, who had never played role-playing games before. And, we're in town at one particular moment, and this character, the player of this character suddenly announces out of nowhere that they were going to leave the room, get on a horse, which they did not have, ride the horse into the forest, which had not been described as being there, right? And in the forest, find a man tied to a tree who is going to reveal the secrets of why this town was so weird.
Okay, so this new player wanted to do that. So
right.
when he proposed, so when she proposed her intention, what she was going to do, she went through all this thing. This is what you did.
Yeah, so it was like, I'm going around the room. We've got quite a few people, right? I'm going around the room, and what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to get on a horse. I'm going to ride into the forest and find a man tied to a tree. It was said just like that.
Yeah. I got that recently. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And all the players, I didn't even have time to react. I probably was sitting there like this, like.
Yeah. She didn't understand the limits of her.
The zones of control, right? But I've been thinking about this a lot the more we play the Veil, because the way we've been playing the Veil is her. It's like we have such autonomy to invent what we're doing until the game master says, you know what, I'd like you to roll for that. I mean, so we could literally say, I'm going to go out and get on a horse, and the game master has to decide, is this worth involving credit or whatever? And we haven't talked about there being a forest or not being a forest. So if the player wants it to be a forest, now it's a forest. That's how you play in that type of game.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to find someone tied to a tree. Okay, Link.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're totally right. And it's a relevant proposition, like these PBTA games. I mean, it's another way of doing the storytelling experience. It's completely different. It's interesting. I mean, I'm still gonna wait. I mean, for you to GM Europe in the Veil, and see how and see how we how I feel about these games. But I wanna say something about that. Is like the PBTAs. The reason why they are so successfully hacked and everything is because it's a solid game because it has been designed in that perspective. It designed a way to play. You cannot change the way to play this game. You cannot. The structure is so rigid and closed in that the procedures are all there. So I mean, there is a little bit of room for style on the fluff level, the setting level. The stuff you've mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. Of course, now here you can play, different. You can have different kind of experience, but in terms of mechanics and like the way the procedure goes about the dice and the narration, they already give it to you. You cannot really change anything.
Right.
Like if I'm looking at my principles, all the rolls, failing forward and all that, they don't apply. They cannot apply because it's already covered up in the old.
Right, it's already done.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
so I want to use this as a segue back into the setting part at the beginning where we talked about Wraith, right? So we had all these different ways to approach the game on a purely setting level. Now, Wraith is supposed to be a storytelling game of personal horror, right?
Yeah.
And when we leave the Shadowlands behind, the dark, dead reflection of the land of the living, and we go down into the underworld, and then from the underworld we make our way to the Tempest, right? Well, what is the Tempest? It's made up of raw emotion and memory and specters and all this terrible stuff, right?
Now, screaming out loud.
So, who describes that? You could dump that entirely on the storyteller, on the game master, if you wanted to, and the journey to discover the far shores, these places which are representations of heaven or at least ideas of an afterlife, right? It's all fragments of memory, right? So how powerful this game is, right, is going to rely almost completely on what we say. Like there's no miniature for this labyrinth. There's no miniature for the Tempest or these realms of heaven. There's no, I suppose, we could find artistic representations to put up, say it looks kind of like this, but right, really we're hanging on description. And here's where your procedure comes in, right? We either rely on the showmanship of the storyteller to be in tune with each character at the table and be in tune with each shadow at the table to create description that hooks, right, and pulls people into the space where they need to be.
Yep.
Right? Or we release some of that control and we open it up to the players at the table talking about what they're seeing, experiencing, and feeling, right? Because the Tempest is this mad storm, right? Yeah. So are we all looking at the same storm?
Yeah, and this again, guided versus co-op.
Right.
It seems to always fall back into these two, because this is a higher order a social contract decision that needs to be discussed every time you play. Do we want a guided experience or do we want a cooperative experience? Now, once that is made as a decision, you need to cover up, okay, co-op, how much co-op?
Right, or what is being
and what is the procedure for narrative power, narrative agency to organize that co-op experience? Because in a guided one, it's kind of easy, the GM's gonna follow the rules as written, but in a co-op part, now you need structure around the roles, structure around the descriptions. All these idea of what's the thing? Crowbar, Chekhov crowbar.
Grimo's crowbar.
Yeah, there you go.
Chekhov's gun and Grimo's crowbar.
Yeah, Chekhov's gun, Grimo's crowbar. Yeah, there you go. So all these elements needs to be covered in a co-op style.
Right.
So but still assuming that we follow the rules raw. So it's a lot of it's a really interesting layer to discuss and to talk about, because I think we haven't talked much about that on YouTube or online. I haven't heard much about that. You have a video about styles of play, old one. You cover some of that back then,
Yeah, when we were talking about different narrative voices, because often when techniques or procedures or approaches get mentioned, it immediately gets grabbed by the claws of bias, and it becomes a discussion about good or bad or better than. and I don't care.
No.
I want to know
Yeah.
why and when and
Yeah.
how.
Yeah. This is why I always say in my ways to play videos, like this is not like the best way to play. This is not. You just make sure that people remember, because it can feel when you express stuff like that. You can, even if you don't, even if you try not to, it might come out as bias, right?
Right. I mean, because we do have our own prep. Like I keep bringing up mysteries because I like running them and I like playing in them. And so why use a particular tone of voice or why use a particular type of narration is going to sync up with bias, because I've thought more about those games and how to make them work. So in a sense, for me and my group, they're better.
And I'm gonna have to talk to you about this game I've been working on for 2 or 3 years, because my goal, my objective was, let's have a game where you have a GM who is a player. He doesn't have a character. He has a specific role, different rules for him. He rolls dice, special, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then you have 1 or 2 detectives, because the genre is for 1 or 2 detectives. And generic, so you can play any time period, era, in the far future, in far west, whatever, doesn't matter. And the idea is that you have like a structure of roles, and so you have phases as well during the course of an investigation, and it goes for maybe like 5 sessions, 10 max, and 1 or 2 or 3, depending. And then what you do is that the roles, the player dictate information, then you roll to see if this information will appear to be true, and and so the player kind of invent from what they get from the interrogations, from what they think, from
the other players.
And so let's say, for example, the players say, I'm going to inspect the room. I want to find digits on the window. I want to find blood digits on that window. So he looks for that. He failed, or he got it. He got the blood digits on the window, for example. If you fail, the GM tells something else about that. Maybe something else going to appear there. And eventually there is a role at the last phase to solve the mystery. And then you have, there are many things, but the idea is that nobody knows in advance. That was
right.
my point was, you cannot be bullshit by nobody. So everybody goes there, and there is a competition between the GM and the detective, because the idea is that the goal of the game is to solve the mystery.
Solve or not solve, right?
So either.
So it's adversarial.
Yeah, it's adversarial. It's like you don't want the player, the GM don't want the player to tell the story, kind of thing, right?
Right.
So the detectives are trying to find the mystery, and they can end up at the end not solving it. They don't know, because they might gonna fail the last roll. So anyway, we're gonna talk about that one day.
Yeah. Have you looked at Gumshoe?
I heard about it many times, but I never. Is it your go-to? Is it your go-to detective?
Oh, no, I don't react very well to Gumshoe.
You guys Call of Cthulhu, right?
Right. Yeah, I work better with that approach, and but I think what you were describing about nobody knowing and how things are going to be true or not is like the exact opposite of how Gumshoe works.
Of course.
And so it would,
isn't it?
Well, Call of Cthulhu is a percentile-based system, which was drawn from RuneQuest, so I have nothing to do with investigation and mystery. It's just probabilities. How likely are you to do something? So in that regard, it doesn't have a voice into how you run the game, right? Whether or not, so you could have one keeper sit there and they announce to the players that there's been a murder, and they think about some reactions to that murder, right? So now the investigators are involved investigating the murder, and they start asking questions and investigating, right? So they don't walk into the room and say, I'd like to roll my spot hidden. They walk into the room and say, I'm looking at the desk, right? This is how we played in those days, right? It wasn't an instant, give me my perception roll, baby. It was, I lift up the ink blotter and I look under, I look at his notepad and stuff. So he's listening to what they're saying and saying, okay, well, what's likely to be here because of the way the murder was done, right? He was stabbed or he was shot or something like that. And then, the investigation continues. And of course, players being players, they talk about what they think is going on. And then when the story seems like it's cool, they solve the mystery and move on. He didn't know who did it. They didn't know who did it, right? They believed that he knew who did it, and they tried to solve it. And he listened to them and provided a satisfactory conclusion to the mystery. That's one way to do Call of Cthulhu, and there's nothing in the game that will stop you from doing it that way.
So that means that you can play Call of Cthulhu raw without fiat and actually have a satisfying experience where nobody knew at the table in advance how the investigation would end.
Sure.
Going session by session, improvising, and eventually wrapping it up at the end. Just so maybe the last session created the answer.
Right. Or, you have one of those unsolved mysteries that's going to lead into another mystery kind of deal. But, because when you're messing with the narrative at that level anyway, when it's based entirely on improv and logic and consistency and reason rather than plotting.
Yeah, that's the big point. Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah, but you need to improv.
Right. Now, the other way, the way that I grew up doing it, is you do know how it was done and who did it and why they did it. And your challenge is to be impartial and allow for solutions that you didn't think of to matter. It's like solutions to how to investigate to matter. So they investigate in a way you're not prepared for. You don't have a printed letter or you don't have whatever. So yeah, that has to matter. So you have to be able to improvise that on the fly and still be consistent with the original mystery, right? And you have to be willing to let the mystery go. They don't solve this one.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's complete railroad.
It's a waste of time. Yeah. So that for me is where the fun lies.
Okay.
Rather than making it up a second one.
Yeah, you prefer the because you made that distinction on Facebook about play to make up, play to made up, or play to find out. And so this is it's an important distinction. When you improvise, you made it up. That's the point. That's the thing, right? So it's really different approaches. The one you described, the second one with the plot, this is a distinction that I make now. Like there's prep versus plot is not the same thing. Like plot is fucking like it's writing the story, and eventually leads to railroad somehow, because otherwise, unless you are mature enough to let go of your darlings, kill your darling as the player go along, and accept that it's going to be anticlimactic if they don't find at the end, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's not everybody that can handle that kind of pressure, but for me, what I find out with the years is that I'd rather secure myself from that by just not plotting, never. So when you can prep, man, you can prep and be ready with stuff, but no plot, and then so that make for less making up because you prep somehow, but you will never find yourself bringing back on the track or creating or allowing, because you mentioned something. That's one thing. When, let's say, for example, you plot and you prep, and then they do stuff in the investigation you were not prepared for, and they came up with interesting things that are completely, out of your plot and your prep, and you end up making them fit. For me, that's fiat. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not lying. It's not immoral. I mean, it's not as bad as lying.
Of course, it's fiat. It's
but it's like
game master exercising their control over the area over which they have control.
Yeah, and you take what they did and you just make it fit in your already thing that you plot. So the whole idea that I had as a player to go there and search for something like that was original in my thinking and left field a little bit and everything, eccentric and everything, it loses its interest because it's being sucked in the stuff that we were actually doing at the beginning, kind of thing. It was wrapping up. It was kind of like it was adjust to fit the narrative. But I wanted to go there to maybe go somewhere else or bring something else. But
I see what you mean. Yeah, I was taking that as different. Like, the player has noticed connections in the story that like are probably down in your subconscious somewhere. Like, this really seems like that cult we dealt with when we played last year, and they keep saying that, and you go to yourself like, what are they talking about? I wasn't thinking about that cult at all. And then you look at your own notes and go, yeah, this is exactly like that cult from last year. Then a decision has to be made. Is it consistent and coherent to make it be that cult? Or is it consistent and coherent to make it not be that cult? Right. It's not a real argument about original vision versus changing it. But what you're talking about is the players want to go left and you want them to go right, and you turn their left direction into right somehow. That's not cool.
And it's not even a quantum ogre. It's like, okay, so I'm successful with a series of role, and I'm going into some cool like interaction with NPCs in a certain direction, and then I came up with a cool clue, because I'm successful with my roles, and then I utilize stuff and it makes sense, and then you're like, oh shit, I never thought about that, and then you make it fit the ongoing narrative, so
why is the player doing anything at all?
That's what I'm saying. Like, this is where I feel like the roles can become irrelevant sometimes, and this is where it's weird for me, So
it's one of those ruptures in culture, right? I mean, I've had a few discussions about these two different ways to plot a mystery: to not plot it or to plot it. And the basic consensus is similar to the quantum ogre. Like, well, if they don't know, then it doesn't matter. But it does matter. Like, if I'm going into it with the intention of solving a mystery that is there to be solved, like reading a detective story, right? The enjoyment of me solving the mystery. It's very different from me going into role play in a mystery. It's difficult to but if I'm going in with one of my player goals being solving the mystery with my character, and rather than my goal being to role play my character while a mystery is solved, those are two different experiences. At least for me, my experience of those situations is different. And when I've caught game masters changing the end to match some of my suppositions, it has been completely unsatisfying. Or when you found out that the demon you just fought actually had 10 health levels instead of 4 health levels, and so he actually killed you, but so I don't want to play that character anymore. Kind of definitely. Reaction.
Definitely. And the thing is that sometimes you're not sure. You just have a gut feeling.
You have a gut feeling.
And because you're polite, because you're not a dick, you don't bring it up. You don't bring it up, right?
Yeah. So, you just don't play with those people again.
Anyway, right? So anyway, but the mystery genre, the whodunit thing, is a really interesting point in the whole hobby, because there is a lot of stuff that emerge from these difficulties that express a lot of things about the hobby on the theory side of things, right?
And then it hooks up with exploration. It's like the abandoned space station, the classic dungeon, the abandoned keep, whatever it is, right? The old haunted house, right? Some of them get described as mysteries. Some of them get described as exploration. But can you imagine running a classic D&D dungeon crawl, right, where the game master doesn't know what the dungeon's map is, right? And if you can imagine that, then you have a good grasp on the different ways to play, right?
And it's definitely and also it's man, because on the a lot has to be said about improv and plot. A lot has to be said about that, and at the same time, a lot has to be said about guided and co-op. I think they are kind of connected. Guided kind of doesn't have to assume plot, because guided can be improv. I've been doing that like for a couple of years now.
Right.
But co-op needs to have a lot of improv in it. You can't. I mean, I can't. It's guided in the co-op mode. I mean, it's possible to have a little bit of guidance, but I mean, improv has to be there. Just for
things like oracles and whatnot, where you roll on a chart or something to find out.
Or player narrating successes. I mean, he wants to do something, he succeeds, and he takes the narration and he runs the rest of the scene. You're like, and you need to improv from there as a GM, right? Even though he doesn't do the Chekhov gun or the Grimo's crowbar or whatever, I mean, you still have to surf out of it, right?
Yeah.
And but I think improv is just, for some reason, it has a bad rep. It scares some people. Some people, they prep every possibility. Like they write it all, and they have tons of sheet of paper. Like if he says that, it goes there.
Yeah. Because they're coming at it from the challenge perspective that I was talking about earlier, right? If I go to the table telling them that we're going to do a murder mystery, and I sit down at the table without knowing even who got murdered, right? Have I really done my job? If they're there to solve it,
that's a decision. Yeah, of course.
Right? Not create it.
Yeah.
So the idea that people will play things for the challenge, I think, is an important distinction. And they will play things for the drama of it, or they will play things to get together and create it together. And they will do it because they want to experience through the eyes of their character, or in God mode over their character, or as a writer over a cast of characters. I mean, there's so many different ways.
When we were talking about agendas back then, with Ron Edwards, I think what we are talking about right now is another level that we need to consider. After the game is, simulation is, and all that, there is another step where, okay, so is it going to be improv stuff? Is it going to be plot stuff, where it's challenge, which we call challenge, so there is something to find out, or there is something to uncover. I expect the game master to provide me with something, preparing something.
Solid information,
yeah, solid information that I will hurt myself against, so or are we doing something that is completely emergent, completely emergent as a collaborative thing? So all these distinctions needs to be considered, but that is session 0, social contract. Before we start anything, this needs to be covered, of course, right?
Right.
So, yeah, man. Well, it's the beginning of our conversation. I mean, I'm pretty sure we're gonna have a lot of stuff to discuss in the next couple of years about that. I think these new games that keeps on going out, proposing like Iron Sword, like that thing, I'm kind of blown away. As soon as I'm done with this conversation, I'm gonna search that online. I'm like, because they're proposing stuff now. I'm sorry, they're proposing stuff like it seems like the modern era is, when you look at 7C second edition,
right,
the more and more we see these games coming out where the design is about proposing a way to play, more than I'm gonna give you just a recycled version of whatever, and then you're gonna be doing whatever you want with it. Now it's really the more and more about here's the design is here's this way to play that is proposed. And it's really hard to go around it. That's why the old school game are interesting nowadays, because they don't have that structure.
Right, it's kind of an inverse of that.
Yeah.
Did you hear about Black Wind?
Oh man, you keep on. I saw that picture though. So that's
right. I posted it on my Facebook.
Yeah. There you go. So it's I think it's a fantasy game, isn't it?
No, it's generic. Listen to this. This is what I haven't been able to bring myself to read through it yet, because some of the tone is so enthusiastic about the game that I have to put it down and walk away.
Oh my god. Okay.
But once I'm overly sensitive to advertising copy, having worked in advertising before. Yeah. So it's written like, this game is awesome, and I don't always have the emotional strength to weather that kind of writing, but it's so enthusiastic that I want to know what they said. And it's presenting such a challenge for itself that I want to know how they did it. So listen to the back.
Go ahead.
A great storm is coming. Black Wind, that's the name of the game, name of the system. Black Wind sets a higher bar for roleplay with a radically new game philosophy that draws inspiration from the masters of storytelling. Experience a universe of unbridled creativity, breathtaking plots, and high adventure, where men become legends and infinite worlds unravel at your fingertips. This system allows you to 1. Free your stories from mechanical and strategic limits. 2. Craft state-of-the-art plots at the core of every adventure. 3. Ensure a fast-paced and eventful game experience. 4. Instantly convert any setting or create custom ones. 5. Play any and all character concepts. So I backed it on Kickstarter, and
it's a generic game that mentions generic things about RPGs. It says
right.
Do
so it's claiming to be a way to manage the creative side of play.
Okay. Not just the resolution.
No, it's not so much about the resolution as building the creative frame. Like, people want their roles to matter. People want something to happen in every session.
Yeah, rules. Right? Oh, okay. Wow. Right? Oh, okay. So they are on a specific. They have a certain. They are dealing on a certain level of organization, of experience. It's not like, okay, so attribute plus skill against an obstacle. It's like, okay, so you want such a story for such a guy, and you want every session like that structure for you, and this guy wants something else, and this guy wants something else, and we have rules that cover that.
Yeah, so that's why I backed it. I don't know if they actually delivered that, and I'll let you know when I know.
I'm curious.
But like, chapter 1 is called Basics, Project, and Plot. Chapter 2 is Concept and Casting. Chapter 3 is Characterization and Score. Chapter 4 is Setup. Chapter 5 is Ascent. Chapter 6 is the middle. Chapter 7 is the fall. So it's following the narrative arc, right? Chapter 8, Resolution. And, so I don't know how well they've managed it. I don't know what type of narrative flow that they're looking for. But I mean, it answers questions like, can you play this type of character in that game? They want you to always be able to say yes. And,
okay, so that's their the challenge. That's their objective, the goal of the design. Wow.
So like I say, I haven't gotten into it yet. I've been reading a lot of other stuff, but
I'm really curious. Because I wanted it. I got myself Genesis as a generic game essentially.
Well, it's a generic pulp game, Genesis. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the die. I wanted to have the game with the dice. but this one seems really different for everything I've heard about. Man, yeah, I'm gonna have to take a look. Is it something that I can print now?
I'm not sure if it's in open distribution or not. I think it must be, because we received a print code for, if you want a printed copy, here's your coupon kind of thing. We received the PDF a couple months ago, but yeah, it must be.
I'm gonna take a look. But this, I think it's a good moment to finish the discussion, because the presentation of this game that seems to be in that area is just perfect. So again, hey, thank you very much for this amazing discussion. It went in all kinds of ways, but we managed to bring it back to topic in a nice and meaningful way, and some cool stuff has been coming up, man. Thank you very much.
Congratulations on staying so awake. At your 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning.
I'm so busy. I still have some stuff to do. I don't even know when I'm going to go to bed. All right. Thank you very much, and I see you around.
Take care.
All right, later.